What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from Shaboom Tick down there. We like the magic, and today, you know what time it is, right? Day two, I mean to say. What kind of weird mess up was that? Day two for the Spark spoilers. And we got like 30 cards to talk about. It's kind of a lot, so let's get to it. Let's start things off with the card I didn't get to yesterday. This is Arlynn, Voice of the Pack. 6 mana, Planeswalker, 4 and 2 green, but you do get 7 loyalty for that 6 mana. Ain't half bad. And each creature you control that's a wolf or a werewolf enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. And you can -2 Arlynn to create a 2/2 green wolf creature token. Okay, so I don't actually have like all the time in the world to talk about individual cards that aren't actually that much worth talking about in this video. But that said, there are a couple of things I want to point out when it comes to this card. Like, first of all, as far as the function, I don't think it's standard playable right at this moment, and I don't know that it ever will be. There's like a 90% chance it won't be. Even if they print a bunch of wolves in the next set, an all-wolf plane in the next set, I still don't think the card is necessarily standard playable. It's 6 mana, especially given the breadth of options that you have at 6 mana. They're just better than this card in most decks that carry green. So like, you can play Vraska Relic Seeker or something instead of this card. That'd be much better. You play Carnage Tyrant instead of this card. That'd be way better in most situations. So I don't think the card is good. I'll just put it that way, but I will say, you can get 3/3/3s out of it over time. It's Creature Factory that makes relatively meaty dudes. There's kind of nothing wrong with that, you know? It costs a lot of mana to get going, and once you get to 6 mana, you kind of don't want 3/3/3s spread out over multiple turns. It's a little too late in the game for that to have that much of an impact, but it's still a Creature Factory that when you can resolve it is going to create value for you over multiple turns, and that's fine. But what I actually want to talk about this card is 2 things that are, you know, somewhat inconsequential. The first thing is inconsequential. The second thing, not so much. I really want to make a point when it comes to this card and other planeswalkers. But the first thing I want to talk about here is I just don't like this templating on the Anthem ability. It turns me off, and I've seen this templating before, and it always bugs me. This should read, at least in my mind, sorry, I've been playing Magic for 25 years, to me, this should read, wolves and werewolves you control enter the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on them, rather than each creature you control that's a wolf or a werewolf. That's super wordy, and like templating like that adds nothing. It's more confusing in a way, especially to newer players who are just like, I don't know, man. But that's kind of neither here nor there. I just wanted to rant for a second about the templating on the Anthem ability, or the +1/+1 counter ability. But what, like, the main point I want to make here before I get out of this card, and I know I've probably been talking for 2 minutes about it already, but I just really want to slam this home. Wizards might be shooting themselves in the foot just a little bit here. And I know I'm a little bit late to that party, but the reason I bring that argument up is because, yeah, good on you, Wizards. You know, 36 Planeswalkers plus the buy a box promo Planeswalkers, or 37 in this set. You're getting out of the box, trying new stuff. You know, a lot of players like Planeswalkers. You're trying to do something cool, you know. You're doing this, like, Infinity War timeline or storyline, and a lot of people are into that. You're doing some cool stuff, Wizards. I don't want you to stop doing cool stuff. But what I will say is that you cannot turn people's favorite walkers into garbage cards. And I've had that feeling with like 3 or 4 different planeswalkers so far, you know, and that's not good. I mean, it's cool, it's fun to have a set with so many planeswalkers, and you have to power them down to some extent to make it fair, you know, like you just don't want this to be the most absurdly powerful set we've ever seen. People complain about that for good reason, but at the same time, you don't want to take characters that you have built up over time and made really special to some people and then be like, here's your Arlynn, jerks, it's bad. Like, that's, I think that's a bad call. But anywho, let's keep moving up the list here. In order of time spoiled, here's Crush Dissent. It's 4 mana, 3 and a blue for an instant. Counter target spell unless its controller pays 2 mana. Then you amass 2. So I want to call this card bad, but I'm like actually not sure about that at all, you know. It's a 4 mana counterspell that's basically just, you know, miscalculate or quench. And at 4 mana, that kind of seems bad, right? But I'm looking at this kind of sideways, you know. This looks like a Mystic Snake or a Frilled Mystic in a way to me, insofar as it's a creature that is also a counterspell. That said, though, cards like Frilled Mystic in this format actually have a little bit of an edge because they go through cards like Negate or Spell Pierce. And this card doesn't have that same advantage. Plus, they can just pay 2 mana. And a lot of times, yeah, if they're casting a 4 or 5 mana spell on curve, this will stop them, but in the later game, this card's going to be almost useless. I will say, you can make them pay the mana if they have the mana to pay and still get a 2/2 creature out of it, or 2+1/+1 counters on an existing army. So the card's not even dead if they can pay the mana, but even then you're paying 4 mana for a 2/2. I don't know how I feel about that either, but the card at least isn't dead when it's supposed to be dead, and that's a pretty good thing about the card, especially considering you're kind of playing a 2/2 with flash. So I'm not going to say that it's a great card or anything, but I will say a lot of people have been poo-pooing on it, and I don't think it's that bad. Now, here's a card that no one has poo-pooed on, but I think I will. Here's Teferi, Time Raveler. I probably got a dislike for that already. This is 3 mana, 1 a white and a blue for a 4 loyalty planeswalker. Each opponent can cast spells only anytime they can cast a sorcery. You can +1 Tefs until your next turn. You may cast sorcery spells as though they had flash. If you -3 Mr. T, return up to 1 target artifact, creature, or enchantment to its owner's hand and draw a card. Okay, so let me pull back a little bit. I do think this is a good card. I specifically think this is a good card in control mirrors. You know, if you're in Esper control, you probably carry a few copies of this in the sideboard just in case you run up against another control deck, because this completely it doesn't just like murder the control mirror or anything. Like they'll just cast Vraska's Contempt like on their turn, or a pretty decent anti-control card, and I do like the -3 on it, but people have been describing this as a straight up removal ability, and it's not. It's just not. It's an unsummon, you know? And I like unsummon. I like bouncing creatures, you know, especially if you got a fistful of counter spells. It effectively is like removal if you can bounce a creature. So I think it's a fine ability, but a lot of people are just calling it like, as people are saying, talking about this ability as though it says destroy target creature, and it just doesn't. Now, what it looks like to me is that you'll probably only +1 Teferi with the intention of actually casting a sorcery at instant speed like once or twice a game. You know, you might +1 them just to put more loyalty on them. That's possible, but for the most part, I see situations where maybe you +1 Teferi, and then at your opponent's instep, you Banefire them for the win, you know? But again, how often is that going to happen? In most games. If it does happen, it'll likely end the game. You like Teferi, don't you, buddy? You do. You want me to shut up? Stop trashing this planeswalker. And don't get me wrong, the ability to flash in a Banefire is pretty good. You know, but you'll do that precisely once a game. You know, will you +1 Teferi every turn? No. Will you +1 Teferi every 2 turns? Probably not. You know, so I'm just not sure how super useful the first ability is, other than casting like huge sorceries at instant speed, which is the Timmy dream, but it's not necessarily the realistic dream. Now, don't get the idea, and I'm talking to Ziggy here too, don't get the idea that I hate this planeswalker. You know, I preface this by saying in the control mirror, this is an absolutely amazing sideboard card that's going to be in the 75 of Esper decks, but I'm not sure it's going to be in the 60. Something else I'll point out real quick before I move on here that I just haven't seen too many people talk about is the fact that, like, you can just bounce your own guys with this and then repeat enter the battlefield triggers, which is really nice. Or maybe you've got an Ixalan's Binding on a creature, and your opponent has since played a better target for Ixalan's Binding. Well, just pop it back to your hand and play it on their better guy. You know, there's a few different corner cases where you can make this ability really versatile, but it's not removal, and it's not really card advantage. It's immediate card advantage, but it's not card advantage over time or anything. So, yes, it's a good planeswalker. You know, don't go into the comments thinking I hate this thing, but I don't think that it's quite as, like, world-ending as some people are saying it is. We get a lot of, like, the sky is falling when it comes to control in Magic. You know, there's certain parts of the player base that will not abide control being a good deck, and every card that gets printed that might help control in some way or another, they think it's the apocalypse, and it's going to end Magic because no one's going to want to play because control is going to be too dominant. This is a control card that's good against control. If you're playing mono red, mono white, whatever, then you have nothing to worry about when it comes to this card. This card is extremely bad, I would imagine, against most of the aggressive decks in the format. But anyway, I was just talking about how I don't have time to talk about cards in depth. But Teferi is a card that you definitely need to talk about in depth. So I think I'm done for now, though. Here's Kiora, another one of my favorite planeswalkers. Kiora Behemoth Beckoner. This is 3 mana, 2 and a hybrid green or blue mana. 7 loyalty on a 3 mana planeswalker. Whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. You can -1 or to untap target permanent. Let me just point out right away that this is a mana dork. You know, it's a 3 mana thing that allows you to untap your lands and get more value out of them. There's a ramp card, and that's good. 3 mana, 7 loyalty. Are you kidding? Like, I don't know, guys. That seems good to me. I haven't seen a whole lot of people, like, even talking about this card, like, at all today so far, but I'm actually kind of excited about this. This is one of the few uncommon planeswalkers that actually looks somewhat playable to me. And she can create card advantage for you. And with a pretty high loyalty like that, it's fair to say it's going to be easier to keep her out than it is most planeswalkers. So, you're like a sort of colossal majesty in a way, you know. Whenever you cast, like, let's say you cast Zagana, for instance, which you probably won't be playing. It's not very good, but let's just, for the sake of argument, assume that you cast a Zagana and you already have a creature with a +1/+1 counter on it. Well, you'll draw the card from Zagana, and you'll draw the card from Kiora. You know, that seems good. Or like anything, you know, you play Nullhide Ferox, draw a card. You play Vine Mare, draw a card. Carnage Tower, draw a card. Like, this just seems a pretty good planeswalker with a lot of play on it. You know, you can play it in a deck that plays blue but doesn't play green, or a deck that plays green but doesn't play blue. There's just a lot of versatility on this. It's a mana dork, ridiculously high starting loyalty cost, and it creates card advantage, given that you have a few big creatures in your deck. Again, the uncommon planeswalker, like templating, they only get one ability and all that, looks like it would lead to mostly nothing but bad cards, but I actually think this is subtly a home run. Speaking of home runs, though, let's look at maybe one of the best cards of the entire day. This is Liliana's Triumph, part of the Triumph cycle. We'll talk more about these. This is 2 mana, 1 and a black for an instant. Each opponent sacrifices a creature. If you control a Liliana planeswalker, each opponent also discards a card. So you kind of get the first 2 bits of the Eldest Reborn for 2 mana at instant speed. This is a mostly strictly better Diabolic Edict, which is crazy. It's like that card still occasionally sees play in like Legacy, you know. It's just looks to have been usurped at this point. You know, a lot of decks that play Diabolic Edict don't also play creatures that they want to sacrifice. Some do, don't get me wrong. Yeah, it happens. I'm sure you've built a deck where you sacrifice creatures and you play Diabolic Edict. I know you've done that. I know you, commenter. At the same time, not having to sacrifice a dude is, in most cases, much, much better than a card like Edict. So, and it makes him discard if you have a Planeswalker, like 2 mana, and the speed on, again, instant speed, you guys. Like, there's just nothing not to like about this card. And again, it's pretty much easily one of the best cards of the day. We got a reprint incoming, though. Here's Augur of Bolas, 2 mana, 1 and a blue for a 1/3 Merfolk Wizard. You know what Augur of Bolas does. Maybe you don't, actually. We got a lot of new players around these parts. When Augur of Bolas enters the battlefield, look at the top 3 cards of your library. You may reveal an instant or sorcery card from among them, put it into your hand, and put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. Well, this saw a fair amount of play last time it was in Standard, so it very well might this time around, especially considering that I'm pretty sure last time this was in Standard, yeah, absolutely, Merfolk and Wizards were not relevant creature types. And they absolutely are this time. You know, I'm not sure that this goes into like mono blue tempo, even though it does draw you an instant or source, draws you a Spell Pierce or a Wizard's Retort when it enters the battlefield. So that seems good, but I highly doubt that deck has the space for a card like this. And Merfolk is mostly a creature-based deck. You know, this might get you an Incubation Incongruity or something like that. But for the most part, you're not going to hit very often in Merfolk. So you're just playing a 2 mana 1/3. That's pretty bad. So I don't know that the card's going to fit into either one of those decks, but it does have relevant creature types. And it could go into kind of a different kind of wizard deck, you know, where it's not necessarily a tempo deck like what we're seeing right now in mono blue, but it's more methodical, you know, more control-y. And this can draw you a Wizard's Retort and cast it for a discount on the next turn. That's sweet. It's also really good with Naban. You probably forgot Naban even existed. You know, the legendary 2 mana wizard that allows you to like copy ETB triggers and stuff from wizards. Like that's seems good with an Augur of Bolas. You know, you get to basically draw 2 instants or sorceries if you have a Naban out. So there's some really cool stuff going on here, and I love that they reprinted this because it fits into a couple of cubbies in Standard. But up next, here's another one of the best cards of the day in terms of like guaranteed to see Standard play in some shape or form. This is one of the better ones. Here's Dovan Veto. 2 mana, a blue and a white for an instant. It's a negate that can't be countered. And it has great flavor text, too, for what that's worth. This is a really good card, you guys. I know, it's just negate that can't be countered, but that means it's guaranteed to see play. 100% guaranteed to see play in Esper sideboards, if nothing else. Or Jeskai sideboards, if that becomes a deck. I've already talked about Teferi plus Banefire, so maybe Jeskai will make a comeback. We'll see. But for what it is, this is just mostly better than negate. Again, not strictly better entirely, because, you know, that extra, you know, the difference between a generic mana and a white mana in some games is going to be the difference between being able to cast the card and it just sitting in your hand, you know. But For the most part, this is just much, much better in most situations and just stops counter wars from happening. So it's, again, just guaranteed to see play, and it's an obviously good card. Oh, speaking of that, by the way, those words apply to this too. Here's Carnes Bastion. It's a land. You tap it for colorless mana, or you can pay 4 and tap it to simply proliferate. It's crazy to me. You know, I don't know how much standard play this sees. It all depends on what decks we have. But obviously in Super Friends, this 100% goes in. You know, just in pretty much any deck that can fit this card, it absolutely goes in. Maybe Hadana's Climb decks or anything else that's based around +1/+1 counters, you know. Forever. This is EDH playable. This is absolutely EDH playable. Whether you're playing, again, with counters, planeswalkers, whatever. You know, this is just fantastic in that format, you know. So this is going to be maybe not one of the chase rares or best cards in the set or anything like that, but I do feel like this is going to be one of the cards that we've seen so far, at least, that has the most enduring value even after the set rotates, because people are going to be playing this in Commander until we're all long gone. But on to one of my favorite cards of the entire day, you guys. I can barely contain my aggressive excitement for Cruel Celebrant. Here we go. CC Babcock. You guys watch The Nanny. You know that reference. It's 2 mana, black and white for a 1/2 vampire. Whenever Celebrant or another creature or planeswalker you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. The only complaint I have on this card is an issue of templating as well. This is almost certainly meant to help out newer players and just to make the wording less confusing, but this would usually just read, whenever a creature or planeswalker you control dies. It wouldn't include itself and then say, or another creature. But again, this is probably just to help people keep it straight. But anyway, that tiny rant is over. Everything else about this card is phenomenal to me. We needed another Blood Artist. I know it sounds crazy. We just got Judith and everything. But, like, yeah, we actually need another Blood Artist. Because, like, the 4 mana one, Vindictive Vampire, Vinny Vamps, he's just not good enough. He's never going to see play in a competitive Aristocrats deck, but this absolutely will. 2 mana Blood Artist casting cost. Well, you have to pay a white, not a generic, but whatever. I really don't care in this case. We still get a 2 mana Blood Artist that also counts Planeswalkers, which is pretty cool. You know, you don't even have to really sacrifice Planeswalkers in an Aristocrats deck to get value out of them. You just run their loyalty out. You know, you'll get a drain. So this is really cool. I love that we got this, and I kind of also love that it doesn't die to Goblin Chainwhirler. Let me point that out about it too. So really big fan of this card. Cannot wait to brew up Aristocrats. Mardu Aristocrats is probably the way to go. But anyway, card just immediately gets me going. Gets the blood flowing. I was super happy to get to this card. If you can't tell, this is like the most excited I've been for a card all day, and maybe the most excited I will be. I am really super pumped to try and make Aristocrats real finally. Here's Honor of the God Pharaoh right here. 3 mana, 2 and a red for sorcery. As an additional cost to cast this spell, you discard a card. Draw 2 cards, amass 1. More Minting Voice, I like to call this, because it costs 1 more mana. That's bad. Do I have to go on with this? Like, I guess you get a body off of it. You know, it's cool to get a body off of your Tormenting Voice, but don't we have Tormenting Voice? One of the best pieces of advice I've ever been given about this game is that Magic is a game of turns. It's a game of turns. It's not a game of life totals. Not necessarily, you know. It's a game of turns. You're trying to figure out what the best thing you can do in Standard is on any given turn. And so the difference between being able to do something on turn 2 and being able to do something on turn 3 is enormous. And I just really want to, even though this is kind of a crap card I shouldn't have taken this long to talk about, I really want to hammer home the difference between 2 and 3 mana and how much of a difference that can make. Even though you get a body, you'd just rather play Tormenting Voice 90% of the time. Here's Wanderer's Strike, one of the professor's previews over at Tolarian Community College. This is 5 mana, 4 and a white for sorcery, exile a creature, then proliferate. Fairly bad card, very, very playable and limited. But Wizards did give the professor another spoiler, and that was the Wanderer, you guys. We've all been trying to figure out who the heck this is since all the different stained glass art was spoiled. Turns out she doesn't have a name. She's simply the Wanderer. She doesn't even have a Planeswalker type, which I think is actually kind of cool. That's how mysterious she is. She don't get a type. Anyway, 4 mana, 3 and a white for a 5 loyalty Planeswalker. Prevent all non-combat damage that would be dealt to you and other permanents you control. You can -2 it to exile target creature with power 4 or greater. I like Planeswalkers like this that they're previewing. You know, Planeswalkers where you can just cast its spell, like whatever spell is associated with it is also on the Planeswalker. I kind of think that's cool. And it's a great ability, obviously, you know. You get like 2 removal spells on this one Planeswalker at a relatively low cost, you know, 4 mana. It's really castable, splashable in just about any deck that plays white. So, yeah, I'm kind of a fan. I like the static ability too, you know. At first I was thinking, this is really good against burn, but like, they can just burn it. You know, it prevents all the damage to other permanents you control, meaning not her specifically. So, yeah, they can still kill this, but that still keeps them from skewering you or lightning bolting you or whatever, you know. So, this is a kind of cool anti-burn Planeswalker in a way, but it's really good against big guys. I shouldn't have to tell you that, but there's plenty of big-ish dudes in this format that you could easily get rid of with this. You know, Rekindling Phoenix, it's obviously very, very good against, but there's even stuff like Tempest Gen, bigger Hydroid Krasis, Niv Mizzet, you know, there's just a lot. Crackling Drake, although people don't play too much Blue-Red Drakes anymore, but you get my point. There's a ton of relatively impactful creatures in this format you can take out with this, and you get 2 shots with it, if all goes well. So, yeah, big fan of this Planeswalker. Not sure where it fits or where it goes, but I think it has more of a chance of going somewhere than a lot of these Planeswalkers we've seen so far. For example, Samut Tyrant Smasher. This is 4 mana, 2, and then 2 hybrid Gruul mana for a 5 loyalty Planeswalker. Creatures you control have haste. And then, -1, target creature gets +2/+1 and gains haste until end of turn, scry 1. Now what I like about Sammy is that you get to use her ability like 5 times. Again, if all goes well, she doesn't get hit with combat damage or burn spells or anything. If all goes according to plan, you can use this thing up to 5 times, which is actually not half bad. You know, you play Sam on turn 4, and then on turn 5, you go like Skargan Hellkite, Nullhide Ferox, just literally any big creature. And suddenly it's even bigger and has haste, and you just randomly get a scry. So they packed a lot of value onto it. But all that said, I just think there are better 4 mana plays. But here's Kaya's Ghost form right here, just a single black mana for an aura that enchants a creature or a planeswalker you control. When enchanted permanent dies or is put into exile, return that card to the battlefield under your control. Now this is actually a relatively common aura for black. You know, the ability when this creature dies, return to the battlefield, return to your hand, whatever. I mean, we've seen this on multiple occasions, but we've never seen the word Planeswalker on one of these cards. It's always just creatures. And that might actually be pretty good, especially for just the 1 mana. But again, I'm ultimately not sure that it's worth a slot. That said, let me just point out real quick that the ability to bring back a Planeswalker after it dies that's good and very annoying. That's super, like I imagine there are going to be some games where your opponent has a Planeswalker and you're just looking to draw that Vraska so you can take the game back over. And if they play this on it, you're just like, screw it. I'll concede the game. Even if I draw the Contempt at this point, it's over. So this could be a little bit better than I'm grading it here, especially considering we've seen this for creatures, but never for Planeswalkers. And the fact that it also gets around exile is a tricky inclusion. Again, that might make this card better than I'm evaluating it. But right now, I'm not grading it super high, to be honest. Again, I'm willing and ready to eat those words, but I'm just not seeing it. But we just saw Kaya's card, so let's talk about Kaya right here. This is Kaya, Bane of the Dead. She's a Ghostbuster. It's 6 mana, 3 and then 3 hybrid Orzhov mana, either black or white every time, for a 7 loyalty Planeswalker. And your opponents and permanents your opponents control with hexproof can be the targets of spells and abilities you control, as if they didn't have hexproof. And you just -3 old Kaya to exile target creature. So you get 2 exiles on this thing. It costs 6 mana. And 6 mana's a lot. 6 mana's a lot. I had a comment the other day. Somebody was like, why do you decry 6 mana cards so much? It's like, because they cost a lot. Like, there are a lot of games where if you're up against the wrong deck, you're dead before you can even cast this. It's not like you cast a 6 mana card on turn 6. Very often you cast a 6 mana card on turn 9. You don't play a land every single turn until turn 6 in most games. So I have a real problem. A 6 mana card or more has to be extremely good for me to think it's playable. Like that Liliana that they spoiled, that looks playable. That looks worth 6 mana to me. But this, I'm not too sure about, even though you effectively get a 2-for-1, really a 3-for-1, because if you leave a Planeswalker on the battlefield. And that looks pretty attractive. But at the same time, I don't know that I want to pay double Unmake mana. Unmake is exile target creature. It costs 3 Orzhov, hybrid mana. And you're basically just casting Unmake twice with a 1-turn delay, and that sounds like it could be good, but one of the cool things about Unmake is that it only costs 3 mana up front. You have to have 6 mana before you can even cast this in the first place. And I'm just not sure that it's quite worth it, even with the anti-hexproof clause. Now, if you don't like how much I just kind of pooped on Kaya there, then here's a card I do like a lot. Here's Angrath's Anger right here. It's a black and a red for a sorcery. Choose one. We get a modal spell. Target player sacrifices an artifact, or target player sacrifices a creature, or target player sacrifices a planeswalker. This fulfills a lot of things I wanted, you know, before the set came out or before the set was even beginning to be spoiled. I put a video out on the channel like, 10, 13, I think it was. Things I want in War of the Spark. Cards specifically, and it was a bunch of like, original cards that I made myself that I kind of wanted to see some version of in this set. And one of my big things there is I want to see another 2-mana Planeswalker removal spell. And a lot of people in the comments were like, we have Dreadbore. Not in Standard, we don't. But this is Dreadbore mana, a black and a red, to effectively destroy a Planeswalker most of the time, There's some matchups, especially Super Friends matchups, where your opponent probably will have multiple Planeswalkers out, but those times are relatively few and far between. Very often, it's likely your opponent's only going to have like one Planeswalker, so this is just effectively Planeswalker removal for 2 mana. I wanted that. I also, in that video, said that I wanted charms back, or at least modal spells in some form or another, and this fulfills that requirement too, so thank you. Wizards, you've probably made this card forever ago before I put that video out, but still, thanks for listening, I guess. Plus, it's also an edict effect for creatures, which is important some of the time. This is the anti-hexproof set. This can take out a Carnage Tyrant. Kaya kills Carnage Tyrant. Liliana's Triumph kills Carnage Tyrant. So if you hate Carnage Tyrant, this is a set for you, kid. But this also can take out random artifacts. I'm not seeing a whole lot of those in Standard right now. So if there's a deck built around like Bolas's Citadel or something, whatever that card was called, then this can take that out. There's just a lot of play on this thing, and it's pretty easily main deckable too. So big, huge fan of this card. One of my favorite cards of the day. But here's Angrath, the Captain of Chaos. What a sweet name. It's like a professional wrestling name from the late 80s. But anyway, this is 4 mana, 2/2 hybrid Rakdos mana. Loving all the hybrid mana they're using in this set. Creatures you control have menace. And then you can amass 2 if you -2 this guy. So I kind of like to look at this as a 4/4 menace for 4 mana, which is not bad, right? It's not too bad. And of course, if your opponent kills, the creature the first time you amass, you still get to make another one and keep this thing out. And, it benefits more than just the creatures that you're making with it. It's just creatures you control have menace, which is actually a really, really good static ability. So I'm not totally sure about this. Again, I have my doubts that like Rakdos decks want a card like this. It's not bad as far as mid-range cards go. It's kind of a creature factory that also benefits you playing big-ish guys. And demanding double blocks, But again, if you're playing big-ish dudes, you're already kind of demanding double blocks. So. But at the same time, Menace is a fine ability that's kind of a pseudo-evasive ability. And in decks where you're playing a lot of creatures, this is an especially game-winning ability on some boards. So, big fan of Angrath, but I'm not sure that he's better than other 4-drop things. I'll keep making this caveat. You got Rekindling Phoenix, Vraska's Contempt to play in these Rakdos decks. So I'm not sure it's better than that, but it's possible that decks will want to play a 1 or 2 of Angrath to, again, have something that just poops out creatures that have a pseudo-evasive ability and also benefits anything else, any other creatures you might be playing. So I could be way off on this. I'm not calling it bad, but I'll give it like a 6. 6.5, Maybe you could see play, but I don't think it's entirely likely. But up next, here's Gideon's Triumph. Gideon has never looked creepier before on any card. It's just 2 mana, 1 and a white for an instant. Target opponent sacrifices a creature. Look at that attacked or blocked this turn. If you control a Gideon Planeswalker, that player sacrifices 2 of those creatures instead. This actually doesn't look like much upon first reading, and I've already seen some people be like, ho-hum, this doesn't look great. But actually, in certain situations, this is a major blowout, especially if you have a Gideon. Like, one thing I want to point out about this card that I don't think all players are necessarily getting is that you don't have to wait until after the combat step. Literally, as soon as a creature attacks, you can cast this card. As soon as a creature blocks, you can cast this card. So that makes it way, way better. And if you do have a Gideon out, it is a massive blowout to play this card. It's effectively a 2-for-1 at that point for only 2 mana. So I actually do like this. I'm not sure, again, if you're going to play it or not. I will say that like white decks have Seal Away already. They have Baffling End and stuff. So I'm not totally sure. But again, it's yet another edict effect. So if you hate Carnage Tyrant, rejoice, I guess. We don't see sacrifice effects like this too often in white. It doesn't necessarily break the color pie from what I understand, but it's still something we don't see every day. It's an interesting card. It's a removal piece that you'll at the very least play in, limited, but I think this might port over to standard. It all depends. Oh, but my people, this is one of my favorite cards of the day too right here. Here's Vivien's Arc Bow, finally. I've been wanting a card that represents her bow since we first saw Vivien. So anyway, it's 2 mana, just 1 and a green for a legendary artifact. That's always cool. You can pay X and tap it and discard a card to look at the top X cards of your library. You may put a creature card with converted mana cost X or less from among them onto the battlefield. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. First of all, let me just say, Zach Stella knocked it out of the park with this art. That art is gorgeous on this card. But aside from that, let me just say the first time I read this afternoon, I thought, I didn't see the discard a card clause on the activation, so I just thought this card was broken. Just completely broken. And I still kind of feel that way, even knowing you have to discard a card. Because this is going to turn crap top decks, I drew a land on turn 8, into the best creature in the top, 6 to 8 cards of your library. You put it right on the battlefield. You don't even just put it in your hand. If you put it in your hand, I'd still be a fan of this card. But gosh golly, you put it straight onto the dang old battlefield, and that's nuts, especially because it doesn't say only do this as a sorcery or anything. You can do this when your opponent declares attacks. You can do this during your opponent's end step. You can do this in response to your opponent doing literally anything. I just think that's crazy. And at the very least, even if it's not a standard played card, although I think it might be, this provides not necessarily card advantage, but insane card selection for decks that will very likely want it in the late game. And as far as late game, card selection tools go, I think this is right up there with Search for Azcanta in some ways. Completely different decks want those 2 cards. Obviously, control decks want to find instants and sorcery, so they love Search for Azcanta. But decks that, are mid-rangey, these green decks are going to want to just trade in a garbage top deck for the best creature in their top 5 or whatever, a lot of the time. So I like an awful lot about this card. And even if it's not going to see much play in standard, which again, I think it might, this card's like an 8 for me. But even if it doesn't, for whatever reason, see too much play in standard, this is an EDH all-star forever. Forever. This is an unfreaking believable EDH card that you want to pick up right now, because when it rotates and supply starts to dip, this card will very likely spike within a few years, because it's just unfreaking believable in the Commander format. But up next, here's Vivien. We saw our bow, so here's Vivien. Champion of the Wild. That's a good name, too. 3 mana, just 3 mana. 2 and a green for a 4 loyalty planeswalker with, you may cast creature spells as though they had flash. It seems slightly random. I guess it's a representation of her bow, but I don't know. That seems weird. +1. Until your next turn, up to 2 target creatures each gain vigilance and reach. And you can -2 Vivs to look at the top 3 cards of your library. Exile 1 face down and put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. For as long as it remains exiled, you may look at this card and you may cast it if it's a creature card. Okay, for 3 mana, this is a good walker. As far as I'm concerned, it creates really decent card advantage for you over a couple of turns. And the ability to cast creatures at flash is actually really synergistic, with that second ability. You can draw creatures and then play them with flash, which is fantastic. It doesn't cost any mana to use a Planeswalker ability. So if you find a card in the top 3, you can just say go, and then you're effectively playing green draw go. It's pretty insane, right? So I like a lot about this card. The low casting cost, the ease of cast for that matter, and the fact that for 3 mana you get a card advantage machine. I don't even care about the first ability that much. Although I do think the first ability is better than it looks in certain edge matchups. If you're against mono blue aggro, you might actually be happy that you get a Planeswalker that allows your, early game creatures to block a flying creature that's wearing a Curious Obsession or something. So I do think there is some edge value in that first ability, absolutely. But it's all about that second ability for me and that static ability. Just casting creatures with flash, seems very good, especially in a color that doesn't always get to do that. I know that flash is, before you comment, and you already have, but before you comment, I know that flash is both a blue and green ability, but mostly you see it on blue cards. You don't often see it on green, even though it is part of green's color pie. So I'm just really excited about this card. I'm not even sure how super playable it is, but To me, a 3-mana card advantage machine that also allows you to play the game in a different way, you know, just seems fantastic to me. So I'm going to give the card an up. But we got some brand new cards here, you guys. I just reloaded Mythic Spoiler because we're coming up on the end. We got some stuff I haven't actually read yet, so I'm going to read this with you for the very first time. Here's Davriel's Shadow Fuge, and I can't wait to hear how many ways this card gets mispronounced. But anyway, it's 4 mana, 3 and a black. I can't wait to hear Saffron Olive pronounce it. A little bit of shade, but he does it. I think he does it on purpose at this point. In any case, Shadow Fuge is 4 mana, 3 and a black for a sorcery. Target player discards 2 cards and loses 2 life. You get to pay an extra mana for your Mind Rot. That's it. You know, I guess each player loses 2 life, which is something, but in a lot of cases, I'd rather play Mind Rot, and that's a bad card too. So, again, the difference between, you know, the difference 1 mana makes is astronomical. And when you're talking about a card that's kind of already bad, I don't think we have to spend too much time on this card, but I will talk for a moment about Davriel Rogue Shadow Mage. I have also not read this card yet. This is 3 mana, 2 and a black for a 3 loyalty planeswalker. Fairly low. What's up? At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, if that player has 1 or fewer cards in hand, Davriel Rogue Shadow Mage deals 2 damage to them neat, and -1 target player discards a card. Yes. Okay, it's on, you guys. I've said this recently because I just did a double deck tech on discard. We need a rack in standard, like a real rack that actually works and doesn't cost 4 mana or whatever, you know, or only trigger when they discard a card. No. This, I'm not saying it changes the whole landscape or anything like that, you know, I'm not, I would doubt that too, but the fact that this is basically 3 mana, target opponent discards a card multiple times, which is pretty sweet, and it's a rack while it sits on the battlefield, you get to have the rack. Yeah, man, yep, that's good. I want it, I want that in my belly. I'm going to eat it. This is my favorite card of the day, and I've just now seen it for the first time. But I can confidently say this is my favorite, you guys. I want it. I want it now. I want it pre-ordered and at my door literally in 5 minutes. I need this card. I don't think you guys have seen me this excited about a card so far this spoiler season. I can't stop the smiling. Bring it down. Bring it down. Let's get serious. I'm so happy. I'm so happy that this exists. I mean, in a way, you can look at this as 3 mana, target opponent discards 3 cards. Like, even if you don't care about the first line of text, and you should. But, this is so good to me. Like, the 3 loyalty is pretty low, so it's going to suffer against aggro decks and stuff. But if you can keep it protected, it's actually really good against decks like mono red and mono white that run out of cards really, really fast, you know? So, yep. It's good. It's good. It's good against control opponents and stuff because you're making them discard. They don't want to do that, obviously. So I like the card. I like the card. I'm not sure that it's amazing against aggro, like I said, but let me just reiterate one more time. I don't know if I've made myself perfectly clear here. I like the card. All right, but now we got to try and come down from that last one. Here's Teyo. Well, actually, let's do Teyo's Light Shield first. Excuse me. Here's 3 mana, 2 and a white for a 0/3 illusion, and when it enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. That's not great. I mean, I guess you can get like a 1/4, you know, if you got no other creatures. You get a 1/4 illusion for 3 mana, which is still not great, but, you know, you just cast Protego on something else that you control. You know, you can, it's also, I should mention that all these +1/+1 counter cards that we're seeing in this set work pretty well with the ongoing Proliferate theme too. So I got to point that out, but overall, the card's not super impressive. Let's talk about Teyo. This is 3 mana, sorry, 2 and a white for a 5 loyalty planeswalker. You, as in you, friend, have hexproof, and you can -2 this to create a 0/3 white wall creature token with Defender. I actually don't think it's terrible, but I think it's pretty bad, you know. Like, it's another card. It's like the Wanderer, you know, in a way. The whole you have hexproof thing means you can't be settled. You can't have Settle the Wreckage cast on you, so at least there's that. But you also can't be hit by burn spells and stuff, which is great. That's the best part of the card right there. And it also allows you to create 2 blockers. And get some space, you know? So I'm going to dial it back a little bit, not call the card bad, because I actually think this could have some significance in specifically the mono-red matchup. You know, it might be a sideboard card if nothing else, but creating, you know, up to 2 blockers against them and keeping your opponent off of Shock, Lightning Strike, Wizard's Lightning, Skewer the Critics, my God, all the burn. That seems good to me. So, again, this could be a decent sideboard card for, you know, white decks to combat mono red. But aside from that, I'm just not seeing too much stretch on it, other than, of course, you know, the Arcady Sabbath deck. This goes really well in the All Defenders deck too. So you got that going for you. I like this card in some ways, but I'm just not sure it's all the way there. That's it, as far as I can tell for the day. You know, maybe they'll upload some more stuff a little bit later, in which case maybe I will too. You know, but that's all for the day. Man, I'm glad we got Davriel in there. That was a close one. It was a close one. 5 minutes ago, at time of recording, that card was spoiled. And yeah, I got excited about a few cards today, but that, man, you might not see me get more excited for a card this season. I don't care what else is in this set. I'm a fan of this card, and I've wanted a rack in standard for a while. So God, I hope, man, can we just push the set out? Like, can we just have the set come out tomorrow so I can go ahead and start playing with Davriel like now? I cannot tell you how happy I am about the card. But all that aside, just let me know how you felt. It's your turn now. You know, turn it over to you. How'd you feel about these? What's your favorite card of the day? Did I miss something? Did I get something wrong? You know, it's pretty easy. Let me go ahead and say this for the second video of spoiler season before we get too deep here. It's pretty easy as a content creator to miss something the day a card is spoiled, or maybe get something wrong, misread a card even. I and many other content creators have done that before. So, you know, don't try not to be too hard on me, but if I did miss something, just let me know. Let me know down there, you know, a key interaction, or again, if I just think a card does something it doesn't do. Let me know down there in the comment section. I'm all ears, but just let me know what your favorite stuff is too. Set's looking pretty hype so far. So I know I crap on some cards here. I do that, but it's my job to be realistic. You know, I know there's some YouTubers out there, and I am not trying to throw shade. Do not think I'm trying to do that. I'm not going to say any names at all, but there are some YouTubers out there that it feels like no matter what card they're previewing, they're like, this is the best card in the set, you guys. Imagine everything you can do with this. And I'm not. I'm going to be more honest with you. You know, I'm going to be a realist with you when it comes to evaluating cards. So if it looks like I'm crapping all over cards, I'm just being a realist. Another really good piece of advice to me, aside from Magic is a game of turns, I had a buddy tell me one time, a Magic player I respect very much, that 90% of cards, actually I think he said 95% of cards, are bad and will never see play in standard. It's the 5% that we're looking for, that we're sifting through for. And keep that in your heart, man, because it's true. You can't just say, you know, every card's going to be amazing, because it's not. We have different ways of evaluating cards that are time-tested and proven. So no, not every card is good. 90% of cards aren't. And you just have to accept that, you know? So if it sounds like I was about to say a cussy there, but if it sounds like I'm crapping all over some certain cards, trust me, it's for your benefit. I'm doing that to be a realist for you. But aside from that, I was obviously pretty excited about a bunch of cards today. So I think that's all I have to say other than do YouTube stuff. Like the video before you get out of here. Before you cut the lights, hit the thumbs up. And subscribe if you haven't done that yet for more spoiler coverage. Hit the bell for notifications. Spoilers every day until pretty late into this month. So make sure you're subbed for the content and any lists and decks that we do once Deck Tech season starts. If you really want to help keep the lights on around here, go to the Patreon if you can. I know not everyone can. I'm aware of that. But if you have $1 every 30 days, should be easy to you know, muster up. But it's hard out there. I understand that. So if you don't have it, don't worry about it. But if you do, every dollar really, really counts, and it keeps the channel alive, because AdSense has been just god-awful the last couple of months. So help keep the channel going. Well, I say that. Another way I'll be honest with you that other YouTubers aren't is that I will do this pretty much no matter what. I love doing this. It's the best job I could ever possibly have, obviously. So even if I make like $10 a month doing this, I'll still do it. I really enjoy it. But if you want to reward my dedication, then go to the Patreon. I'll leave a link in the description. But aside from that, just check out TCG Player. They help sponsor my content. I'll leave a link in the description for them too. You can pre-order stuff already from this set, or if you just want to, you can kind of use TCG Player as a price guide of sorts, kind of a barometer for how we feel about the prices of these cards so far. Even if you don't plan on pre-ordering anything, it's nice to look at prices and kind of see where we are on some of these, because it'll give you an idea of how good people think certain cards are. So make sure you go over to TCG Player. It helps the channel out just when you click the link. So even if you don't have a buck to throw into Patreon, click the link. They call me once a month and they're like, hey, Dev, you've been getting them clicks. We like that. Okay, bye. So I like, you know, it helps the channel out when you do that too. So help me out any way you possibly can if you enjoyed the content. If you didn't, don't. You know, whatever. But if you want to help, do that. And I think I'm done for now, though, you guys. I'll probably reload Mythic Spoiler once more before I get out of here, but just in case I don't see you again today, make sure you spread love and be kind.